Faced with fast-growing urbanization and motorization rates, providing a sustainable response to Africa's growing urban transport and mobility needs will be a struggle for most African cities. Towards sustainable and smart mobility, this episode of the Move Africa show is with Sasheen Rajkumar, a SANRAL project manager, engineer, creative problem solver, and futurist that actively thinks about solving local and global problems. Sasheen, welcome. It's great to have you on the show. Can you give us a brief introduction to your background and your role at SANRAL?
Thanks for giving SANRAL the opportunity to participate in this discussion. So a bit of my background. I studied civil engineering at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I was a SANRAL bursary holder, and then SANRAL employed me after I graduated. In my first few years, I was seconded to engineering consulting firms, where I initially spent my time gaining experience on construction sites and in the design office. And then I returned to SANRAL to work as a project manager. Around 2018, SANRAL launched the Technology Innovation Hub, which I became actively involved in. And it was there where I was exposed to things like smart mobility, smart roads, and future transport. It's also where I discovered my passion for technology and innovation. And I'm currently studying a master's degree in technology innovation management at the University of Pretoria because of this newfound passion.
What exactly is your definition of smart mobility and what are the key elements of smarter mobility?
I like the definition of smart mobility defined by Deloitte, which is reducing congestion and fostering faster, greener, and cheaper transportation options. Essentially, smarter mobility is rethinking the way in which we move people and goods. What are some of the key elements of smart mobility? It should be integrated as a multimodal transport system. It should be connected to the internet through digital platforms. It should be affordable, considering all socio-economic classes, especially the poor in the African context. It should be inclusive by ensuring access to mobility for everyone, regardless of their location, destination, social class, race, gender, age, disability, creed, etc. And its success will also mean it needs to be efficient and trustworthy by being on time and reliable. It also needs to be sustainable, environmentally, economically, and socially.
What are some of the biggest challenges currently holding back progress in smarter mobility?
I think for an integrated transport system, the challenge may be a lack of a shared mobility vision between transport authorities, municipalities, and the private sector, or just a lack of proper planning. For a connected future, data will be the fuel. And this is a challenge because data is still very expensive and there's still a digital divide, meaning access is granted only for those who can afford. For affordability, we need to acknowledge that South Africa has a very high unemployment and poverty rate. Statistically, the global benchmark for how much a person from a developing country should spend on public transport is about 10% of the commuter's income. In South African metros, this figure sits as high as 50.4%, which means that some commuters are spending more than half of their income on transport. For inclusivity, the challenge is to be able to cater access to mobility for all demographics. For example, some solutions exclude people in wheelchairs. What about the mobility for babies and young children? If you own a private car, you could buy a baby seat. But if you use public transport, there's probably no baby seats. So parents will have to carry their children on their laps. For sustainability, the challenge is addressing what is not sustainable. From an environmental perspective, emissions from the transport sector account for about 10.8% of South Africa's total greenhouse gas emissions. And we also acknowledge that the road transport sector is responsible for 91.2% of these emissions. Petrol and diesel cars produce these emissions, and many people believe that these emissions are also linked to global warming and climate change, which may be the reason why we are seeing more frequent natural disasters like the excessive flooding events in KZN. Now, petrol and diesel vehicles are powered by fossil fuels, which means they are non-renewable. which also means at some point in the future, they will run out. And as we deplete the remaining reserves and the demand becomes more than the supply, the price of these fossil fuels start to increase. And I believe we all felt the effects of the price increases of petrol and diesel in the last year. So reliance on fossil fuels is not economically sustainable. From an economic and social perspective, when we have the problem of congestion or too many cars on the road at one time, the solution used by a road authority is typically to add more lanes and build bigger and crazier interchanges. And these we know are usually very expensive projects that take a relatively long time to construct. And for us, space is limited too. This is because while we know roads have the ability to unlock developments, when the development actually occurs close to our national roads and eventually densifies, we're usually left with very limited space to widen our roads and interchanges in the future. So that's no longer sustainable. We also acknowledge that the lifeblood of our country could be linked to the freight industry for the mobility of goods. But the challenge here, however, is a continued and increased reliance on roads as a primary mode of freight transport. Because more trucks on the roads results in more frequent road maintenance, and it also increases the probability of serious to fatal crashes. Transportation is also a system of systems. So sometimes we may be solving a symptom of a problem and not the root cause. For example, in the transport industry, we could define the problem of too many tailpipe emissions being due to too many petrol and diesel cars on our road, for which electric vehicles powered by renewable energy are a feasible solution. But have you asked the question, why are there so many cars on the road? Because it's a different kind of problem that requires a different kind of solution. And lastly, I believe the big impact is how we view change, especially our leaders in our organization, both in public and private sector. And I believe there are three negative ways in which they could view change. Firstly, we are ignorant about change. This is when we don't know what's actually going on around us. For example, the impact of disruptive technologies like Uber and Bolt for the mobility of people, or Checkers 6060 and Willys Dash for the mobility of goods. Secondly, we are resistant to change. This is when we're just holding on to the current status quo, either because we're unable to let go of how we've always done things in the past, or we're just so scared of change that we simply resist it. For example, automation and autonomous vehicles. Some of us may fear jumping in a vehicle with no driver, and so we won't. While others resist this type of technology because we have a high unemployment rate, and we say we're not going to just replace thousands of taxi and truck drivers with cars that can drive themselves. It is a very valid point, but in answering your question, it does hold back progress. And thirdly, it's slowness to change. This is when we know we must change, or when we've already agreed to change, but either we don't know how to, or policies are not enabling us to, or for whatever reason, we just take so long to make that change that we simply delay progress. For example, we know that in terms of environmental sustainability, South Africa should be adopting and locally manufacturing electric vehicles powered by renewable energy, but we are seriously lagging behind globally. So that's a mouthful of challenges, but there are many that we have to address for the future.
A lot of key challenges in the way, but how can these challenges be addressed right now?
So I think asking about the solutions is a great follow-up question because that was quite a number of challenges that I painted. And I'll start off by saying that the solutions start by embracing change. So we need to adopt new mind shifts that fundamentally challenge the way in which we think about smarter and sustainable mobility. Here to create an integrated transport system, we should be thinking about the mobility of people and goods instead of the mobility of just passenger cars and freight trucks. It also means we need to think about a user's entire journey, which includes the first and last miles. For connected mobility, I believe we need to narrow that digital divide by providing access to free Wi-Fi for the purpose of mobility, or by creating data-free apps. For the mobility to be affordable, we need to think of new business models. And I think if we look at technology, its effect and how it's disrupted other business models with subscription services, for example, like Netflix, paying a relatively small monthly subscription for access to mobility, maybe one such option with significant potential. And here the concept is known as mobility as a service. For mobility to be inclusive, we need to identify our demographics well and really understand their travel patterns so that we can provide them with access to mobility that they require and they desire. For sustainability, on the one hand, we need to transition to vehicles powered by sustainable energy, like electric vehicles powered by solar energy. And we do have supports. Currently, National Department of Transport's Green Transport Strategy 2018 to 2050, and the Department of Trade and Industry's Auto Green Paper. But on the other hand, we need to also implement solutions to reduce the number of low occupancy vehicles on the road. For example, by making high occupancy vehicles or public transport more attractive. And also by providing infrastructure to support walking, cycling, and micromobility. And here, SANRAL is busy with its draft smart mobility strategy that incorporates these initiatives. Also, the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport has come out with its Smart Mobility Vision 2030, and they have the objective of growing Gauteng through smarter mobility. To ensure that we are solving the root cause and not just the symptoms of the problem in our transport system, we need to spend a lot more time defining our mobility problem using systems thinking approach. And here I'd like to reference a quote by Einstein, where he said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution." So it's just a light bulb moment to say how much of time we should be spending thinking about the problem and not on the solution. And lastly, I believe we really need forward-thinking, bold leadership to create learning organizations with a thirst for knowledge of the rapidly changing social and technological environments. To be adaptable by embracing and encouraging and being open to innovation and change, and to move with agility when we agree to change.
Can you share some innovative thinking and projects currently underway at SANRAL?
So SANRAL's current long-term strategy, Horizon 2030, is quite forward-thinking, and it looks to embrace technology and innovation. And through Horizon 2030, SANRAL launched a few key initiatives. The first is a technical innovation hub. We've also launched a research and innovation program and Engineering 4.0, which is in collaboration with the University of Pretoria and the CSIR. Now, these initiatives help SANRAL to stay up to date with emerging technology trends and also helps us focus on research on smart transport, future cities, and infrastructure. Some of the key projects that we are busy with, SANRAL launched its app a few years ago to allow toll road users to top up their accounts using their phones. Now we're looking to add value-added services like facilitating cashless payment for public parking through the app. Another value-added service is account-based ticketing, which is a single ticketing system for all various public transport types, including trains and buses. SANRAL is also interested in supporting electric vehicles, and we have a pilot project whereby we intend to install a few fast chargers along our busiest corridor on the N3 between Durban and Johannesburg. In terms of future transport, SANRAL is considering the development of a test track for research on autonomous vehicles. SANRAL is also currently participating in a number of local and international committees, including National Department of Transport's National Autonomous Vehicles Working Group, looking at the policy and regulation of autonomous vehicles, as well as PIARC, or the World Road Association Task Force, dealing with new forms of mobility. And lastly, SANRAL is also running a road transport foresight project, whereby we held a series of imminent thinker webinars, industry workshops, and surveys. So there's a lot going on at SANRAL with respect to innovative thinking and future thinking.
It's very inspiring to learn about all these initiatives. But to make these projects come to life, how important is collaboration between industry players in the public and private sectors?
That's a really good question. And I'd like to answer the question with a quote, starting with a quote rather. It's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Now we're talking about building the future. So I believe collaboration is essential. In order to enable more collaboration, I believe we need to have a shared vision of that future. And then we must work together by sharing our knowledge and resources and defining and solving our problems and planning and coordinating our projects.
On behavioral change, how can actual behavioral change happen? It's not easy.
I think behavioral change is one of the most difficult things we can try to change. But there are a few options that we have. The first is with legislation and enforcement. This is kind of a negative consequence. For example, you have traffic congestion charges to reduce the number of vehicles on the road during peak periods. On the converse, we could incentivize, which is a positive consequence. For example, if you want to improve driver behavior, you could offer rewards. Vehicle insurance companies do this quite often, where they offer incentives for better drivers, which results in fewer crashes, injuries, deaths, and ultimately for them, less claims. And I think the last way we can enable behavioral change is by creating an enabling environment. For example, if we as road authorities provide well-designed infrastructure that attracts more people to walk and cycle or use micromobility devices in preference of their large passenger cars on the road, we will enable that. If we only build roads, we're only going to get cars.
What fresh thinking and new ideas are currently in progress to keep cities accessible without compromising residents' quality of life and the environment?
So there are currently some really bold and interesting concepts that have emerged and even started construction, whereby future cities are being completely redesigned using a blank canvas. I'm just going to talk about two examples. The first is in France, 15-minute cities. So this is a residential urban concept in which you would be able to get most of your daily necessities by either walking or cycling from your home, not more than 15 minutes away. And the second is in Saudi Arabia, NEOM, called the Lion, which is a smart linear city designed to have no cars, streets, or carbon emissions. It's 170 kilometers long, 200-meter wide city that provides access to all your basic amenities in less than 5 minutes away from your apartment.
Wow. What emerging technologies do you see disrupting the industry and cities?
The technologies that will be big disruptors or currently are big disruptors, I believe, are big data and big data analytics, 5G wireless, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and machine learning, drones, camera technologies and sensors, and autonomous vehicles.
Sasheen, when and how do you see these new technologies impacting our daily lives here in South Africa and Africa?
With all these technologies, it's all depends on adoption, how well the adoption takes. The sooner the adoption, the quicker the disruption effects are felt. But it's all dependent on political will as well. Does the government want to allow autonomous vehicles? Do they want to allow electric vehicles, for example? It's very difficult to predict when it comes to technology. I think if you go back 30 years and we look at the phone, for example, I think most people use the landline. And if you ask them, what does a future phone look like? And you try to tell them 30 years in the future, you'll have a phone that is less than 5 millimeters wide, has a TV in it, you'll be watching TV. Try to explain to them about social media and TikTok and Bitcoin and the things that you can do from this, they wouldn't believe you. So 30 years into the future, you know, are we going to be in electric vehicles that are autonomous, that's linked to our bank, that pays for charging itself? Is it going to be linked to social media? There's a whole new form of unimagined businesses and entertainment that awaits, and it's very hard to predict. But I do think we feel the effects of them unknowingly, and I think the technology evolution has had natural progression in that way as well. In dealing with these committees, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, some two points to note that I realized. So first, autonomous vehicles rely on sensors and cameras and all this new sort of vision equipment, and it is enabled typically by a big battery. So autonomous vehicles are most likely going to be electric vehicles, and if you don't have a roadmap to support electric vehicles currently or for the near future, then you probably are not going to see a future with fully autonomous vehicles because they won't have the power source to enable them. So the one technology is dependent on the other technology. That's the way we're realizing things. And secondly, in dealing with the international committees, it became very apparent that the problems they have in the first world countries are not the problems we have in third world countries. So they are talking about things like gender equality, looking at autonomous vehicles, which I'm not really thinking of because it's not a problem that we're having here in South Africa. But the problem we are going to have in South Africa is with the jobs, the driver jobs. Sorry, with electric vehicles first, it is the 70,000 petrol attendant jobs. And when I looked up online, it's only South Africa, Brazil, and a few states in America that actually have petrol attendants. Everywhere around the world, it's self-service. So the transition to electric vehicles and charging your car from filling fossil fuels is no different to the status quo. But in South Africa, there's 70,000 people who actually do that for a living. They fill fuel in your vehicle. So what is going to happen to them when we go fully electric? And then with autonomous vehicles, we have a taxi industry with over 260,000 drivers. And there are other people who work with the drivers, like the conductors and so on. We've also got about, I think it was about 80,000 truck drivers. So what's going to happen to those jobs in a country where you already have a high unemployment rate? But the thing about it is not to say it's all doom and gloom. People are going to lose their jobs. The technology is coming, but over a long period of time. Between the technology arriving and now, there's also a huge skills gap that we would need to fill to support that type of technology. And that's where we should be focusing a lot of our attention, is upskilling those people who are going to be out of a job first, and then everybody else where there's an opportunity.
In closing, what is your vision for the future of cities and how do we get there?
How far in the future is a relative question, but I believe in our lifetime, based on the incredible speed, development, and adoption of new technologies, the future of cities will probably be fully electric, powered by renewable energy. Everything will be connected digitally. Data will become a basic human right, free in most cases. It will be autonomous, taking over most tasks. Humans shouldn't be doing things like driving, so it'll be safer. It should be well planned, so there won't be a need to go far for anything that we do need. And when we do need to travel further, we won't own private cars, but rather pay for access to mobility as a service, so there won't be any congestion. When we do need to travel far, we'll probably use high-speed trains or hyperloops if the technology becomes viable, and maybe even go underground if Elon Musk's Boring Company makes it feasible. And if his other company makes it a success, we could all be living in Mars. How do we get to this future? I think Einstein said it best when he said, the world as we have created it, is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. So essentially, we need to embrace innovation and change to get there.
A special thank you to Sasheen Rajkumar for this insightful conversation on the Move Africa show here on Future Cities Africa.